Okay, how's everyone feeling? Everyone feeling okay still? Smiles still, sir? Smiles? On that side? Yes, yes, yes. Great, great. I see a lot of teeth. It's really bright in here. I don't know who's who. But I'm so happy that you're joining us back again here at the plenary. Now, I've seen that you've made new friends and then you've had some snacks and coffee. Has anyone had the chance to go into the marketplace just now? Raise your hands. Eh, how lah? 1, 2, 3, good sir. 4, 5. We could do better. It's right next to us. But it's okay, it's okay. Right after this, promise me, okay? Promise Hanis that you will go to the Impact Marketplace. Amazing features there. Over almost 20 social enterprises are waiting to be discovered here at the AVPN Global Conference and the Hasanah Forum. Now, before we begin, I saw just now a lot of people are taking photos, selfies, groupies. Can you do me a favor? When you do post on our social media, can you please hashtag the Hasanah Forum? Can ya? Okay. And while you're at it, please follow the Yayasan Hasanah account, our official account at Yayasan Hasanah. Hello to our live stream viewers as well. Thank you so much for joining us again. Now, the Hasanah Forum is proudly brought to you by Yayasan Hasanah, a foundation of Khazanah National Berhad. Since our inception in 2015, Yayasan Hasanah has impacted more than 2.4 million people across over 600 programs that we've supported, working with over 470 partners. Partners that some faces that I see here today, we're so glad that you're here with us. And of course, at Hasanah, we attribute these milestones to strategic collaborations, strategic support from the public, from the private and people sector. Collaboration is in Hasanah's DNA, and this is the core of our first session. Please come. We're about to begin. Thank you so much for joining us again. Themed from narrative to action, the Hasanah Forum will dive into 3 key dimensions of impact. First, we have people and institutions. And then we have people and society. And thirdly, people and leadership. I invite you to please, once again, book your time to attend all 3 panel sessions of the Hasanah Forum at the plenary. And you can also find session timings in the app or in the agenda board outside. Ladies and gents, in a moment we'll be hearing the first of a 3-part session of the Hasanah Forum, where we explore the dimensions of people and institutions collaborating on systemic change. That's the topic that we'll be talking about at length today. Now, oftentimes we, at the social impact scene, we race to tackle immediate concerns with short-term fixes, however, and often this takes precedence over longer-term systemic action. Over time, we have to ask ourselves, is this sustainable? Or to a certain degree, is this impactful? This session will explore contours of systems change. What does it look like and what challenges need to be kept in mind towards it being realized realistically? At the end of this session, we hope to be able to understand the roles of diverse institutions, learn lessons from different collaboration models, and perhaps reimagine a more equitable systemic change. Ladies and gents, to kickstart the first of the 3-part Hasanah Forum panel sessions, titled People and Institutions Collaborating for Systemic Change, please welcome our panelists. Datuk Johan Mahmud Merican, Secretary General of Treasury, Ministry of Finance, Malaysia. We invite Dato' onto the stage to be joined by Matthew Smith, co-founder and CEO, Fortify Rights. And also Ng Boon Hyong, Chief Executive Officer, Temasek Foundation. Dr. Ruth Shapiro, co-founder and Chief Executive, Center for Asian Philanthropy and Society, and moderator, Prita Venkatachalam, partner and co-head, Asia and Africa, Bridgespan. Prita, whenever you're ready, take us away. A big round of applause, ladies and gents.
So thanks so much to AVPN and the Hasanah Forum for bringing us all here. It's great to see so much of energy, passion, and enthusiasm, especially as we all meet about 3 years after the last AVPN Forum here in person. And it's also excellent to see the energy from different countries, cultures coming together, different impact stories that we've been hearing over coffee, over breakfast this morning, and I hope the next 2 days is a lot more of that. Our theme for today is something very simple. It's just about justice-based philanthropy and what's the role of people and institutions in bringing about systems change through collaborations. If that's not a mouthful, and many of you know the answer, then I think the role of the panelists today is going to be that much harder to talk about their experience in how collaborative philanthropy has played a big role in systems change. We heard this morning, including from Gabrielle from Hong Kong Jockey Club, how philanthropy is barely 1% of total social sector spend, and that's the case across countries, especially in Asia. So how does the tail wag the dog? And I think that's a big question that we are going to be handling here. So for really bringing about systems change, what would be the role of collaborations for philanthropy with other stakeholders like government, businesses, the civil society is a big topic for today's panel. On that note, I'm going to start off to ask Ruth, given her extensive experience in philanthropy and publishing on that topic a lot, what she sees as the opportunities for philanthropy to shape a more collaborative world for systems change. Ruth, over to you.
Thank you very much, Preeta, and thank you very much, Yayasan Hasanah, for inviting me to be part of this prestigious panel and conversation, and thank you all for picking this session versus the other ones that are out there. I hope that after this session you agree you made the right choice. Okay, so we study Asian philanthropy, CSR, impact investing, all the ways in which private capital can be brought to bear on doing good. And we do that across the region, although our home base is Hong Kong. Collaborations are natural in Asia. Why? Because relationships are natural in Asia. People like to work with work with people, play with people, marry people who they have connectivity with. So this is a part of the world that understands collaborations at a very deep kind of DNA level. But when you enter into formal collaborations, it's not so easy. So let me give you just 3 characteristics of what we would say are successful collaborations through Asia. First, there has to be a key champion. And that champion can be the government, which was the case with the Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation, when the government asked all the companies in the Philippines to help because you know it's ground zero when it comes to climate change. Or it can be a company, and a good example of that is here in Malaysia with the Trust School Program and Yayasan Amir, which is an affiliate of Yayasan Hasanah. Or it can be a nonprofit itself. And I would like to think that CAPS, my center, is a form of collaboration in that we have about 40 donors who don't put their name on it and are supporting evidence-based research. So for those donors in the room, thank you very much. And for those who haven't yet funded, go ahead and take a look at our website. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth. I requested speakers to keep their comments brief, and I think Ruth has taken it to heart. Okay. But thank you, Ruth. We'll be coming back to you for talking a little bit more about the role of philanthropy as well. Over to you, Johan. As we discussed since the morning, government plays such a key role in social welfare spending, and a lot of philanthropy look to partner with government at the central level and local government level to really drive systems change. So speaking of your experience, given you hold the budgets in Malaysia, how do you look at collaborations that government can foster with other actors to drive the sustainable development goals in this country?
Thank you, Preeta, and thank you everyone for joining the session. I think we're all aware, certainly government has a few levers it can deploy in terms of furthering this agenda. Three come immediately to mind. Obviously, first, often coming from Ministry of Finance, I guess I have to talk about taxes. Secondly, in terms of more policy, enabling policy in general. The third, I want to touch a bit on employing matching grants. So first on taxes, I think not unlike many jurisdictions, obviously we have tax provisions. We have something called 44.6 for charitable organizations to give them ensure that they are able to function as charitable organizations without any taxes. We even have also some deductions like we call Section 34.6H, which allow companies also to then contribute towards philanthropic purposes. And I think that's quite traditional, and what we've tried to do is see how can we further improve on that. We've recently, in the recent budget, increased the deductibility of such philanthropic contributions. But I think that's par for the course. I think the second one is really what more can we do on a policy front. In fact, just yesterday, the Prime Minister announced a policy to promote family offices in Malaysia. I think recognizing this is also one key source of philanthropic contributions. This requires not just facilitating in terms of tax, but also looking in terms of immigration, looking in terms of also legal recognition of such functions. I think but another bigger space when you talk about collaborations is what in government we often talk about alternative service delivery, this notion that there are some things which certainly non-government actors are better at delivering social outcomes than we ourselves in government, whether for not just for the passion they have, but also in terms of having that localized knowledge and understanding right down to the community. And so I want to switch to the third one is this area of matching grants. This is something that we've been increasingly working, again, recognizing that, that unique position and probably comparative advantage in delivering on social outcomes. Government, again, Ministry of Finance has been working on matching grants. That's a collaboration that we have. For example, we have set aside a budget of about 100 million ringgit in the budget announced by the Prime Minister, working not just with Yayasan Hasanah, but also friends from Yayasan Petronas, Yayasan Saim Dabi. These are where we also recognize that sometimes, me in government, don't get out much, so don't really know all of you, whereas my colleagues obviously are certainly a lot more on the ground, better understanding what the needs are. And this ties into what we want to have more, I would call community-empowered engagements, because I think historically sometimes, the government servant in Putrajaya, in his ivory tower, he thinks he knows best. He decides to build a whole bunch of houses for our indigenous population, where actually they don't even have any interest in living in those homes. This is where we do need that partnership, whether with NGOs, philanthropic organizations, or really on the ground, understanding those communities so we can deliver results that, that really are meeting their needs and enabling them to deliver on a sustainable basis. And just the last point on this, in this collaboration, because we work quite closely with our friends in the government-linked companies, we want to see it going beyond, corporate CSR, where it's just about, we make our profits in however way we want to, and then to make up for our sins, we then just give out a check. And I think increasingly, how can we, in the whole spirit of sustainability, integrate that into their businesses, For example, I guess Petronas, they have a part of their petrol station selling products from poor homes. Even like a telco could even help, employ from the less disadvantaged to even, be agents. So then it's become a more sustainable way, especially if we are then trying to alleviate people from poverty and the like. So maybe I'll stop there for now.
No, thank you so much. So many of the points you made are so important for collaborations, and especially being grounded in the communities you serve. This morning we heard Mr. Ajay Piramal speak about tribal health, going back to your point on indigenous communities. And India has one of the largest collaborations in healthcare for tribal health and welfare. And really, if you look at some of these communities, a lot of the indicators from life expectancy, tuberculosis burden, infant maternal mortality are far worse off than an average Indian. So to the point of equity and dignity, why are some parts of our population and communities so worse off? And how can government and philanthropy and businesses really partner to bring about better societies for all? And I think on that note, I would like to come to you, Matthew, given you work a lot on human rights, and a lot of these basic welfare are rights for every individual in community and society. And you all have used the framework of investigate, engage, strengthen very powerfully in the human rights space. Has this approach really helped you address some of the systemic issues and helped you collaborate with other like-minded actors for driving better human rights?
Thank you so much, Preeta. It has, actually, and I think collaboration has really been the core of the impacts and successes that Fortify Rights has been able to achieve. We have been on the front lines of genocide and crimes against humanity and other atrocities happening in this region. The good news in all of that is that there are human rights defenders throughout Southeast Asia, South Asia, that are poised and ready to make positive impacts. Many of them need and want support. And so I think that's where our model of investigate, engage, strengthen comes in. We've been operational in Myanmar, Thailand, here in Malaysia, Bangladesh. We'll be expanding this year actually to Ukraine. And I think one important thing to mention in terms of how we work is our team comes from the countries where we work, and we believe those closest to the problems are closest to the solutions, which is along the lines of what the Secretary General was mentioning in terms of community-based development. And I think, historically, for human rights work in the region, a lot of philanthropies based within this region have, for whatever reason, avoided human rights work. And one thing that we're hopeful for is seeing more engagement with Asian philanthropies on the questions of human rights. And there's a history of collaboration there. Going back to the 1940s, states in this region were involved in negotiating and drafting the key human rights instruments that are used today, the key international treaties that make up the human rights framework under international law, norms, and standards. And every government in this region has signed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, ratified these treaties, was involved in these treaties. And so I think building on that collaboration, we are hopeful to, we're hopeful that, Asian philanthropies will take a bold step, or as the Undersecretary General said this morning, flip the script. And I think in terms of achieving the SDGs, making sure that human rights are not a carve-out, that human rights are actually central to achieving a lot of the development goals, I think might be one of the, not the silver bullet, but one of the key answers to moving forward.
In fact, a lot of the work that we've done on surveying philanthropy for why do you need to collaborate, and one of the biggest reasons we heard back from philanthropists is how do you actually collaborate to pool risk, which might be more like an insurance function, but when it comes to very sensitive topics like investigative journalism, rights-based approaches, even things like child protection, often the power of many helps accentuate some of these causes and get more budgets, whether it's from government and other stakeholders. So we do hope that there would be more collaborations for some of these tricky issues. On that note, I'd like to come to you, Boone. And Temasek has been a key player, whether it's been in impact investing or philanthropy, more recently through the Philanthropy Asia Alliance that you all are bringing together to actually inform the way that you can collaborate for greater systems change. So we'd love to hear from you what are some of those approaches that you all have deployed over the years that's worked well, and what have been some of the challenges you've faced?
Thank you, Preeta. It's a pleasure to be here, and likewise, thank Yayasan Hasanah for inviting us here. So Temasek Foundation is the philanthropic arm of Temasek Holdings, the investment company. So Dato, at the investment company, every year when the investment company makes a return above its risk-adjusted cost of capital, a percentage of that wealth added is automatically set aside into what we call a community and philanthropic fund. That fund, that money is then expensed out, gifted, donated out, managed by the trust. Then the foundation uses the return of that for philanthropic work. So I think one of the very important thing is really about, even at not just government, at companies level, really about policy intentions, right? Being deliberate with intentions. Second, I think Mr. Pirama and also Dr. Gabriel spoke about it. You need to do well before you do good, right? So setting aside capital so that you can do good is so important. As you know, Temasek has a whole range of different companies that we invest in. Temasek's governance approach is that we do not direct or interfere with the operations of the portfolio companies. Because the portfolio companies have the best know-how, best context, best experience to direct the operations, even their CSR or their philanthropy. But what we do at the foundation is that we are an active grant maker. So we actively engage with the portfolio companies, not just the portfolio companies, like what Peter you mentioned, the Philanthropy Asia Alliance, beyond the portfolio companies, outside of the portfolio companies in Singapore and beyond Singapore, on ESG and on philanthropies. So what do? We share initiatives, we share ideas, we co-create content, opportunities, we encourage collaboration so that we can collectively deploy financial, human, and even social capital to work. One example I can recall is during the last 2 years of COVID-19. I remember going to the CEO of Temasek Holdings, Dylan Pillay, and I said, we need to do something. So we started to mobilize our supply chains, our private sector companies to look for masks and hand sanitizer. And he said, so I told Dylan, I said, we need, to move our company support. Dylan said, I'm on board. So we got him together, wrote a letter, sent out to all portfolio company chairmen and CEOs, and said, would you come and do this together with us? In the first year, the chairmen and CEOs would call me up and say, Boon Hyung, we are so busy with all our businesses. Why are you getting us to do all this? Right? But after when they saw their staff step forward, volunteer, we mobilized about more than 20,000 volunteers in Singapore, just to give out hand sanitizers to the whole Singapore. And then they see their colleagues, their staff putting up postings on Facebook and Instagram. Then the second year when we did something else again. This time the chairman CEOs came back to me and said, thank you very much, Boon Hyung. So first year they were resisting, second year they said thank you. Then the third year they came back and said, Boon Hyung, what else? So I think there's a human spirit out there, be it whether you're public sector, private sector, civil societies, individuals or families, right? So everybody can do something. Are there challenges? Of course there are. Demand is always greater than supply. So we have to choose. We have to choose what is valuable and how to create value. And I think at the center of it, even though your philanthropic organizations, having good people, good human capital is still key.
Now that's very well said. In fact, I think COVID has been one of the silver linings or blessings in disguise has been the power of actually humanitarian response eliciting lot more compassion and lot more collaboration. And it's interesting to hear you move from how you had to push it in year 1 to the pull in terms of people asking what more can we do in year 3. And I think the trend is that this is going to hopefully continue, not just in terms of the amount of interest, but also the kind of causes that people are willing to collaborate on. On that note, I would request that people who have questions, please do look at the Slido. It's going to be on the screen. So anybody who has questions for the panel overall or for individual members here, please direct the toughest questions here to my co-panelists. They're all full of energy today after the coffee break. So we would request you all to use Slido and post any questions you have. And the last 15-20 minutes, we'll seek to address the audience questions. I'm going to come back to you, Johan, if that's okay. Given that government has defined priorities, in fact, in a lot of countries redefined and reprioritized after COVID, given some of the health indicators, education indicators have really slipped, and a lot more people have actually moved back below the poverty line, given the effects of the pandemic and also global trends and economic downturns. As the government here in Malaysia, where do you think your priorities are going to be over the next 5 years, and where do you think there can really be opportunities for businesses and civil society to work more closely with government? And if you have a couple of examples, then that'll be really helpful.
Thank you. I think it was very clearly articulated by our Prime Minister in the 2023 budget, which he delivered in February. I think he made it very clear, despite the government perhaps facing major fiscal challenges or constraints, particularly coming out of the COVID crisis with a very high level of debt and even in terms of a fiscal deficit, he made a very conscious point in terms of the importance of social justice. And and it increased the allocations in a number of areas. And one particular area which he focused on was to, well, he said, menoktahkan kemiskinan, it's to eradicate hardcore poverty. That was one key priority of the Prime Minister. And in context of perhaps in the post-COVID, even the allocation for health and education was certainly increased, including, I think he made a point that perhaps, for us living in KL, we're surrounded by skyscrapers. What we perhaps really need to focus on, what are the basic infrastructures across the country, whether it's the conditions of schools, conditions of clinics, even right up to the most rural parts. And those were the areas that he's given us stretch targets in government to ensure that those basic infrastructure must be addressed, whether it's water, electricity, and also telecommunications. So those are amongst the key focus areas to really deliver for the population. In terms of collaborations, coming back, I just wanted to pick up on what Boon Hyung was mentioning about working with some of, under Temasek, he has his portfolio companies. Within government, we obviously have our GLCs. We have Datuk Faisal here for Khazanah. One of the things that we saw is that we've seen an amazing response, particularly from our government-linked companies, particularly in terms of response to floods. In fact, they've established amongst themselves, we call it the GDRN, the GLC Disaster Recovery Network, which actually has been rebranded, but at least it started off really as a coalition of the GLCs, recognizing that sometimes when there's a disaster, everyone just runs down and it becomes like mayhem. And I think what they've been able to do is this, organizing themselves in terms of deploying assets, taking advantage even of our supply chains, because obviously amongst our GLCs we have warehouses, we have assets, and obviously most powerfully we have ever-ready employees willing to go out there to be volunteers. And I think that's one great examples where we're able to leverage on the strength of our GLCs. But the one thing that we look forward to more in terms of collaborating with the civil society is the need to, and I come back to this thing about wanting for community empowerment, but this whole point about how to be more customer-centric. Obviously, we've got the likes of Tan Sri Wahid, Tan Sri Matno, former bankers. Banks went from a period where at one point in time they had they were very product-centric. They had someone selling you credit cards, someone selling you a loan, someone selling you a wealth product. And over time they evolved towards having, for lack of a better, customer relationships where, if it's a SME, what was through the product offerings that they could offer you, or if you were high net worth. How is that relevant to government? Well, we tend to still be like the banks of old. We have a Ministry of Education which looks at the education needs. We have a Ministry of Welfare that for poor family gives out the handouts, or Ministry of Health. What we perhaps need to do is to either embrace structurally the structure in government so that we can be more having an equivalent of a customer-facing, front-facing part of government, or that's where we need to better collaborate with civil society organizations so you can provide a complete solution. So it shouldn't be that so typically, if a disadvantaged family, they won't just have an education problem. They won't just have education of money. They have typically, troubled families who typically have a multitude of issues, and we need to provide a more integrated solution. And that's something I must confess we in government still struggle with. That individual typically will still have to go to the welfare department to get their cash assistance, going to the health department. Whereas how can we better work with our civil society partners to provide that more integrated and holistic solution? And I think that's one area that we look forward to as part of this agenda of alternative service delivery for government.
I think that's, again, such an important problem of all issues in development being so multidimensional and needing a much more integrated approach. Like some countries have tried to devolve power more to local governments where it's place-based, so that there can be an integration of multiple service needs of the populations with the government being requested for provision of better water, education, healthcare, and even issues like climate, which are really cross-cutting, not just specific to one department. So how can we encourage not just government, but also a lot of foundations who have priorities which are verticalized by sector to really be much more cross-sectoral? And on that note, I'm going to be a bit provocative because we are hearing from all the panelists, and I see many nods in the audience as I hear the speakers talk, that collaborations is important, that collaborations are key to driving better social development. But look at reality. There are so few collaborations that are working. Somebody was joking to me that while collaborations aim for ecosystem change, Actually, it's about managing ecosystems, that everybody who's a partner in a collaborative philanthropic initiative has such huge egos that aligning on shared interests, shared strategy, shared governance is incredibly hard. So whilst, of course, we are all saying it's important, the reality is that collaborations are not as many as we'd like for good solutions. I think COVID saw a lot of that, like you rightly said, both voluntary and based on structured partnerships. But why are those really not taking off? And I'm going to go back to Ruth because she's always had great answers to tough questions, given her study on the topic. What are some of these pitfalls, Ruth? And
well, thank you very much, Preeta. Well, first of all, everyone in this room knows that as wonderful as the Temasek trusts are and its accompanying organizations, and Yayasan Hasanah and its accompanying organizations, they are not only thought leaders, but they're also outliers within the whole Asian philanthropic spectrum. Most philanthropy in Asia comes from families. And we know also in this region that 85% of all companies are still family dominated. So most of the philanthropic capital goes through the company, which means that they have particular agendas that they have to meet in addition to doing good. So what we see is a real increase in public-private partnerships to do good between the company and the government. And that is happening all over the place, including, of course, in Malaysia. But they're not easy. And most collaborations, even though the intent is good, fail because people don't take the time to actually say, okay, what is your comparative advantage? What is mine? Who is going to make this decision? What are the governance principles we're going to go by? And those organizations and those processes and collaborative efforts that take that step early on to create governance systems that really matter, they're much more likely to succeed. When you think about collaborations, it means a group of actors are coming together to do something good, but they need to be incentivized to stay there. Why are they may be asked at the beginning by their government, by their friend, they may see a certain CSR opportunity that they need to take, but what keeps them involved over the long term? Because generally, collaborations are not only hard, but I don't know any that have graduated particularly by solving the problem entirely. So they tend to need to be for the long term, and then you need the right governance system. The other thing I just want to say, the last point about what the type of collaborations we see in Asia, we have to remember that there's not a one-size-fits-all. So not all collaborations are going to pool funds. In fact, in this part of the world, they tend not to. They do something that I call parallel funding, where the actors know what each other's doing and they coordinate in that vein. So a great example of that is the Village Social Transformation Project in Maharashtra, which brought together all these companies that would each do their bit. One was good at telecom, one's good at agriculture, one's good at with water, and they worked together to transform 10,000 villages. But that also brings the Achilles heel of a collaboration. The idea behind the Village Social Transformation Project was the chief ministers of Maharashtra. So when the new chief minister comes in, he says, well, that was the old guy's project, now I'm the new guy, so I want to do something different. And we all know that when different regimes come in, it affects the sustainability and longevity of the collaboration itself. That's another reason that governance principles have to be able to surpass the leadership over time. Thanks.
Yeah, no, those are some of the tricky issues, and you need strong political will to really transcend the party in power often to have continued government support and engagement. And we have seen in multiple Asian countries budgets for collaboratives like peak and then go down if there is cut in government spend in that area. On that note, coming to human rights back again, there have been a lot of effort from multiple stakeholders to address rights-based issues. But to be frank, the space for that is reducing today in the current political, regulatory context of many countries in Asia. What do you see as the future of driving systems change in rights-based issues, especially recognizing that this is a groundwater issue. It does require much more deeper change from multiple stakeholders. It's not a Band-Aid solution. So the issues are trickier and the spaces for engagement are getting narrower. Not a pretty problem to have. So what are some of the ideas that you might have, Matthew, to address this, and where can collaboration play a role?
I wish I had a very quick answer to that, but I do not. But I think you touch on some really key issues there, and certainly philanthropy for Fortify Rights and for the many community-based groups that we work with throughout this region is key. It is the fuel that keeps our work going, and it's what enables us to achieve impacts. One thing I think worth mentioning is, traditionally, I think a lot of human rights organizations have struggled to measure their impacts. And what we've tried to do is be very meticulous about the data that we collect, about the work that we're doing. Since our founding in 2013, our team has changed 90 laws, policies, and practices in line with international human rights standards. That's how we measure impact. That's how we measure success. And so, the investigative side of our work, for example, is really about collecting credible and reliable information. And what we found is that, governments and people in positions of power can have a very difficult time doing the right thing if they don't have credible and reliable information. And so one thing we do as a team at Fortify Rights is make sure that whenever we're documenting human rights violations, we cannot get anything wrong. And so we take great time and care to make sure that our work is accurate and credible and reliable. And I think also philanthropies need that as well. And philanthropies need to know, okay, if we are going to support human rights, how are we going to measure success? And so we're trying to work with partners to help our partners also understand how they can set realistic, achievable objectives. It's certainly not going to be the silver bullet to address this bigger issue as you framed it, but we are hopeful that with more philanthropic support for human rights coming from the countries where we're working, I feel like that will be one of the key bold steps forward in the coming years in terms of achieving.
What countries are you working in, Matthew?
Yeah, we are in Myanmar, Thailand, Malaysia, and Bangladesh at the moment.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks. Moon, you spoke about the role of corporate social responsibility and the investee companies. And John, you encouraged that businesses should think beyond CSR to also doing well and doing good. What's been the role of Temasek Foundation to really influence, more doing good as you all are doing well? And are there insights that you have for other businesses in this region for, contributing back to society?
So, just to track back, being a steward is core and central to us. It's enshrined in the Temasek Charter. So the Temasek Charter says, if you go to the website, it says Temasek the investment company is an active three roles: an active investor, forward-looking institution, and trusted steward. Now, active investing is what Temasek does. How it does it is it thinks about intergenerational long-term sustainability, patient capital. But the reason why Temasek does what it does is because it's a trusted steward. And just to echo back, just now in the conversations, the trusted steward didn't come out first. It's not trusted steward, active investor, forward-looking institution, but it's active investor first, thinking long-term first, then you can be a good steward. So you need to do well before you can do good. So I think that's one. We've been communicating this with people about intentionality, about who you bring on the leadership team, on your board, on your management, and what's on your institutions, what's your policy. We believe that is increasingly an expectation that is an important social license to operate, especially as an international global investment company. So you are not doing public service, you're a steward wherever you go. If you invest in Brazil, you should be a steward of the people and the environment there, And I was just having this casual chat with Matthew, that Matthew talks about humanity. Peace and progress is a core tenet of what we believe in as well. So just one last point, just to circle back and also reinforce what Datuk mentioned, and also what the forum is talking about empowering communities. So we set up two initiatives. If you go Google on Google Map, Temasek Shop House is a place right in the middle of Orchard Road that Temasek gifted as a social impact hub. So people can go there, civil societies, NGOs, NPOs can go there, meet with Temasek Trust, talk about different programs. There are co-working space there. There's a social enterprise coffee that employs differently abled people. It's visible. So if you believe
and the coffee's delicious.
the coffee is started by two young gentlemen from the university. They employ differently abled people behind the counter. They adapted the barista machine just to do that. So when we first started, we don't charge them rental, right in the middle of Orchard Road. When they first started, it was a third outlet. That was about 3-4 years ago. Now they have 7 outlets. So it's with these little things that we hope that civil societies can come on board. The other thing we did is that we set aside money in what we call an Oscar fund. It's really about micro-philanthropy. During the COVID-19 period, we saw that there were schoolgirls who wants to gather together their friends in school to bring art and craft packs to elderly living in rental apartments to teach them to do art so they improve their mental health. So they just needed some money, a few $1,000s for them to buy the art pack. They were willing to rally people together. So we set up a fund so that it was easy for people to come and to apply for it. We call it micro-philanthropy, not the big ones, thing. Then there were a few mothers, women, that emptied their bank account, and they just love to cook. So they were cooking meals, and they were distributing to people who were needing it. And we asked them, why don't you consider applying for a charity status so you can get tax exemption? They said, it's too troublesome for us, for these few ladies like us. So they raised $10,000. We matched them $10,000 so that they could amplify the impact and bring others along. So I think it's really about, I think in philanthropy, as philanthropic organizations, we don't always have to be majority shareholder. I think there's value and benefit to becoming minority shareholder, letting others people take a lead, letting others come on board, so that you edify and empower others.
I think that's a very powerful message, to let everyone come in and have a share and not just have one or two parties controlling the whole collaborative action. The whole theme of this AVPN conference is, of course, as we know, global challenges and Asian solutions. So Ruth, if I could come back to you, what do you see unique in Asian philanthropy compared to some of the things we're seeing in Western or other countries' philanthropy, and what's the power of that?
Thank you very much. So one of the key differences is that I think when you go to the United States, and the United States I know better than Europe, so I'll stick with that one. I am an American, but generally in most of my life I've been proud of that. Anyway, when you go to the United States and you hear from some of these big foundations, they say, we're going to solve for climate change. We're going to solve the world's biggest problems. We're going to solve for this illness across the board. And you'd never hear that kind of big talk, I guess, in this part of the world. In this part of the world, everyone is much more pragmatic. And we actually call it pragmatic philanthropy. I don't think many philanthropists see themselves as the solution to a global problem. They see these collaborations. They see partnership with government, which is a very important also difference from Western, particularly American philanthropy. In Asia, you partner with government from the get-go. And Ajay Paramel talked about that. They work with government. You talked about it. There has to be this collaboration and partnership. Government is at the table regardless of the type of governance system there is in the country. And that's really important because we all know that when government's at the table, they can pick up the innovation and scale it across the country in a way that no philanthropic capital can. So I think that, you know, having a pragmatic view, wanting to partner with government, and the last point is because these families control their company, control their private wealth, control the R&D and business development of their company and their investments, they do take a shared value approach. They're looking for win-wins. And so I think that that's much more sustainable over time when you put those kind of incentives to keep doing well so that you can do good simultaneously are really important.
I think that's absolutely right. We are seeing a huge, huge trend, and it's mostly at the design stage itself about how to partner with government and what's the role of government in potentially scaling the solutions or the impact that a collaborative or indeed a nonprofit is aiming to demonstrate in a few geographical areas that they work in. Johan, there are many of us here, philanthropists who know how to work closely with government, and as Ruth said, Mr. Ajay Piramal spoke vividly about how Piramal Foundation does that. But equally, we hear many philanthropists who have never partnered with government, who have worked much more at the service delivery level or are looking to allocate funding. Are there any tips and tricks that you have about how philanthropy and how civil society can work better with government and how success can be enabled?
I'm not sure anyone really wants to work with government. Highly bureaucratic and really unfriendly organization to partner. And I think that's why we talked about empowering to the level that probably knows best. And I think that exemplifies, for example, the collaboration that we've been having with forging with Yayasan, Hasanah, Shahira. We work on this basis of matching funding. In terms of it's much clearer in terms of as what you've mentioned, the demand is always greater than what we have. First we amplify what we have by doing it on a matching grant basis. They already have an established governance. They already have the knowledge of the space. I mean, I have to confess, we in government may not be the best decision makers of which charities that we channel through. And so I think that's where I personally feel that the power of partnership and ensuring that the decisions go down to where people know best. And I like to pick up the point of leveraging on what comparative advantage, because I think this requires obviously a whole of nation approach. I mean, each of us have our respective. So maybe I probably know how to structure a tax incentive, but not necessarily good at giving out the funds.
But we can be good at leveraging those tax incentives.
Exactly. And so as I mentioned, there's a role for the government-linked companies and corporates in general. There's a role for civil society. And how do we get everyone together? And that's leveraging on everyone's respective strengths. And also, in terms of this community-based, in terms of solutions, it's also ensuring that we leverage on their respective strengths. So sometimes, I gave the example, governments have sometimes built these concrete houses which the indigenous people don't want. And similarly, sometimes we have this danger as government, we have this one-size-fits-all with, being government want to be consistent and have like a one standard policy. So for example, what you don't want, sometimes you take an indigenous person out of their homes and try to give them a TVET training to become a factory worker. That may not be their natural inclination or strength. So some of the work, I think, for example, doing with Yayasan Hasanah, some was, for example, veleging on, say, indigenous people natural strength to become, for example, ecotourist guides. There was some even trying to do organic vegetable farming. In fact, we, government, even have started employing some as forest rangers. So how do you then work with them? And some even have gone as far as they may not be so good at trying to do formal organized agriculture, but then working more like, for example, syntropic forestry is one area that some of the NGOs that we work with have again, experimented. I think that's this whole thing about how do you get everyone on board, leveraging on everyone's strengths and also leveraging on the inclinations of your customer.
Yeah, in fact, looks like the era of participatory budgeting, participatory development, which used to be in the textbooks of like 50 years ago in development economics. Looks like those are really back now. I mean, if you look at India and Bangladesh, there's a lot of citizen-led budgeting to the point you're making on what are real priorities. And some of our work on community-driven change, we've seen, for example, the point on community kitchens where the programming was done by government or top-down by philanthropy. It was given as quote-unquote food aid during COVID, where urban slum populations and these informal settlements were made to queue up and stand for food aid donations by local government or philanthropy there. And when the voice of communities was taken, the same money and budget was reprogrammed to set up community kitchens in these slums where the local women, the local youth participated in cooking what their children, their elderly like to eat, and that was distributed locally. So there's so much power in that. Oh, great. Looks like people have been vociferously typing. Thank you. I think we have a good range of questions for the last 15 minutes. So as I absorb the questions, just one more question to you, Matthew. Have you seen in the rights-based world any collaboration work? Before we go into the questions, would love to end on a note of seeing an opportunity that's actually worked in practice where multiple actors have come together for a cause.
Yeah, absolutely. Two immediately come to mind. One was, we had coordinated with a non-state actor in governments and other actors to get two perpetrators of genocide to The Hague. It's the first time that perpetrators from Myanmar, in this case, are in the hands of the ICC. It required, it demanded really a lot of collaboration from the grassroots level to the highest levels of government. Another area we've collaborated with a group called Doha Debates to train young Rohingya photographers in photography. Got them on social media, their work started to get recognized, got recognized by a book publisher, and so we're in a situation where 3 young Rohingya photographers who are essentially confined to a refugee camp in Bangladesh actually got a book deal. And their book was published a few months ago. It's called A Chance to Breathe, which is a quote from one of the authors who said, "This was a project that finally gave me a chance to breathe." It's available on Amazon, shameless plug. You can find it online. The proceeds go to the Rohingya community directly. And that is a project that also involved authorities in Qatar. The Qatari government put on a photo exhibition recently to show their photos at M7, which is the premier art exhibition in Doha. So we have had these types of examples of really what I think were very productive and beautiful collaborations and partnerships.
Great. No, thank you for that. There are many questions. I'll try and do as much justice I can in the last 14 minutes. Here's a question for you, Boone, from the audience. How do you address your portfolio company's desire to take credit for outcomes when they're actually working collaboratively with their peers? And related to that, the other question for you is about what have been some of the toughest challenges that you've faced in collaboration?
Okay, one by
so
one.
One toughest challenges, and related to that, your portfolio company's desire to take credit, where actually it was a peer group effort.
Actually, in our view, we don't see taking credit as taking credit, right? Because I think if you look, this morning when I look at the Hasanah in AVPN, you attribute and you credit everybody. Everybody is part and parcel of that. And when people want to take credit, wants to communicate, actually it's not a bad thing. Actually, they're taking ownership. They're taking responsibility. They're thinking about resilience. They're taking accountability. And for us, actually, we encourage it. We prefer for ourselves not to have our logos very big. We prefer to have other people's logo bigger than ours. Because for every project that we do, we're imposing challenges on ourselves as a foundation. In the past, we measure impact. But now we're also measuring the catalytic nature of our financial deployment. So we're asking ourselves, every time when I put money into a project, where are the co-funding coming from? And after we graduate from the project, where's the follow-on funding coming from? The follow-on funding can come from government, because government, social causes. But it also doesn't stop private sector from thinking about projects who are bankable, impact investing, to invest in them, because then they become enterprises and the impact can sustain over a longer time. So I think for us, it's okay. Actually, it's okay. There's a way for us to explain and to manage everybody, together. So come to the second question. I think you mentioned it, for me already, is really about egos, right? Yeah, but I think if there's a level of trust, there's a level of values, there's a level of intentionality and credibility, we can get everybody on the same table. And it is our hope and our wish for everybody to, it's not a long table, we call it, I like King Arthur's story, because it's a round table, there's no chairman.
Love that. Here's a question for you, Johan. In the Malaysian context and the topic of people and institutions, how does the government balance economic growth with shared prosperity, and shared prosperity from the point of view of really driving systemic change for marginalized communities in the country?
I don't think it's mutually exclusive, and I think certainly if you want to have sustained growth, it certainly needs to be inclusive, where you're able to mobilize, the different parts of the nation and all segments of the population. And I think that's the reason why, in terms of government policies, you have both. One, you need to leverage on the agglomeration of cities in terms of driving, perhaps high quality investments, value added, knowledge driven innovations. But we have certain segments of the country, perhaps in a East Coast Sabah Strait where infrastructure is less. So certainly then the commitment of government is also to invest heavily in infrastructure and basic infrastructure for the people there, ensuring that they also have that connectivity for their products to reach the city centers, being able to also to perhaps have areas of production which perhaps are less sophisticated in those areas. So we need to have, I guess, investments which are contextualized to the level of development in different parts of the country. And we need to ensure that we are optimizing on all parts. And I think that's why, shared prosperity, I think generally when, I think from the beginning, I think, of economic policy for Malaysia, from early on, with a national economic policy, we always emphasized growth with equity. More recently, when we talk about the new economic model, it always talks about trying to push for high income, but at the same time, inclusiveness and sustainability. So I think that remains at the core of our economic plans and budget policies for Malaysia. And I think, and it's particularly emphasized by our current Prime Minister, as I mentioned, talks about, not just, in the same breath talking about trying to promote global investments into Malaysia, also has the same conversation about addressing poverty, providing vocational training, raising incomes for fresh graduates. Because I think ultimately we also want to have a situation where the fruits of growth and economic development translate to higher incomes for our people.
Thank you. Here's a question for you, Matthew, on political risk. How has political risk really informed your work and your partnerships in the work you do?
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for whoever asked the question. All manner of risk is really on the table when it comes to our work. Security is one of our top priorities. It's obviously more important working in a context like Myanmar than it is in a context like in Malaysia, for example, but it is important. In terms of political risk, well, a lot of what we're doing on a regular basis is engaging governments or others who have a piece of the puzzle. We were talking earlier about, we'll talk about human rights with anybody, but sometimes that can come with political risk. And I think there are times to talk with human rights abusers, and there are times when it's inappropriate to speak with human rights abusers. And also just to mention, to give credit where I think credit is due, the government of Malaysia has done something extraordinary in terms of the way in which it is dealing with the Myanmar military junta. And is really showing, I think, some moral guidance within ASEAN, there's political risk there as well, and so I would like to commend the authorities here for doing the right thing and essentially refusing to lend political legitimacy to a military junta that is responsible for mass atrocity crimes. But I don't know if that touches on the question, but certainly risk, all manner of risk, is unfortunately at the forefront of our brains on a daily basis.
Here's a couple of questions for you, Ruth. One is around Asia's giving as a percentage of wealth is abysmally low. I think some reports even say it's hardly 0.1, 0.2% of wealth. So how do you encourage greater giving from philanthropy in Asia? Are there lessons? And a second, very different question for you is, what are roles that universities, academia, think tanks, what roles can they play in collaborations for systems change? So greater philanthropy and role of academic research institutions.
Thank you very much. So it is true. The benchmark that we use is that in the United States, it's generally agreed that philanthropic capital is equivalent to 2% of GDP. If we took 2% of the GDP of the 18 economies that we include in our Doing Good Index, it would be $700 billion a year, which is more than 10 times the amount of foreign aid that flows in here, and about a third of the cost to address the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think we all know that Asia as a region is on track to achieve 0 as a region of the Sustainable Development Goals. So we do have to increase the spend. When we went around and asked philanthropists, why don't you give more in Asia? And we all know the stories. They're giving to Harvard, giving to Oxford, giving to Stanford, giving to kind of blue chip international organizations like the Nature Conservancy, but not necessarily giving locally. Why don't you give more? And it was really interesting, and this was when we got started, so it was 10 years ago, but without exception, whether the person was in Korea, China, India, Malaysia, Thailand, everywhere in the region, there was this sense, I don't trust the local organizations enough. And we were really struck by what we call a pretty profound trust deficit. So how do you overcome a trust deficit? Well, you become much more accountable and transparent. And that is the responsibility of both government to put in place regulations and incentives to be transparent and accountable. But it's absolutely the responsibility of the organizations, the nonprofits and social enterprises themselves, who have a responsibility to tell their story really well. And in today's world of AI, it becomes increasingly important to have a good website and tell a good story. So I would say if we build up trust and accountability, the local coffers will open more. People are incentivized in Asia to give locally. They have connection to place. They want to build the relationships they care about. So we just need to make it as easy as possible. The second question is universities, right?
Yeah, maybe a line or two, because I think we have the time.
Okay. I'm making up for answering my question so succinctly at the beginning. We need talent. There is a real dearth of talent in the social sector. We know it. Partly it's because there's this widespread perception, which is based on reality, that people in the social sector earn less. And so the best and the brightest have not traditionally wanted to come into our sector. But that's changing as people become wealthier, and because this next generation really does care about making the world a better place and addressing our planetary concerns. So we need talent in the social sector. We need talent really desperately in the sustainability sector. In order to help companies and organizations and governments do the right thing, you have to know what the options are. You have to know what an HVAC system is, what kinds of things are most reliable when you recycle, how do you control methane in the fields. So that is technical information. So it's not just creating university programs on philanthropy and nonprofit management, which are just blossoming all over Asia, but it's also helping people have the scientific and technical knowledge to really innovate from the ground up to solve the climate crisis.
Thank you so much, Ruth. And a huge thanks to my great co-panelists here today for sharing their wisdom and with a lot of candor, even when there were provocative questions. Also, big thanks to the audience. I think Ruth said that I hope you all are happy you made the choice to be here, but sitting here, I actually noticed the strength in this room increased over the duration of the hour rather than deplete. So a huge thanks for such an engaged audience and great questions. I'll just end with a quote of Mother Teresa that really touches my heart, which is close to this topic. She very famously says very often, I can do what you cannot do, you can do what I cannot do, but together we can do great things. And I really think that this panel's diversity and the diversity in this room can do great things if we all come together. So on that note, a big thanks again to be here.
Thank you.